Hey folks, welcome back. This is Lucid, and we are jumping back in with the final. I know I said the last episode was the final episode, but with the final episode of the tournament final series. And in this, I'm going to give my closing thoughts. I feel as caster, when you're in a game, you're kind of stuck in the moment, and you try to reflect, but a lot of times you don't. You're caught in whatever kind of well of misery that that turn is dredged up for you, and at the end, the after action review is a time to kind of pause and reflect and, all of that when you can see everything now. Well, as a caster, you see everything the whole time, So, in some ways, I've been doing my after action review of the entire game. That's kind of what this whole series is. But we'll do closing thoughts. But first, we're going to look at score graphs, which I had some of them, but I didn't have, my infiltrating wasn't perfect. So, nice feature they added in the last patch is when you hover your mouse over it, it flashes. So let's talk about them. Pythium. Pythium was actually biggest for a little while. Look at this right here. This is pretty close to. This would be early. He was actually biggest probably at the end of expansion. So Pythium had excellent expansion. Maybe wasn't the fastest out of the gate. We can see End was the fastest out of the gate, right? Then Pythium did pretty well. We can see Atlantis actually was looking okay at the start, but then here's when everything went south. Yes, if we look at Yes was absolute rock bottom. Aside from it, even after like Atlantis, even after the fall, he was lowest after Atlantis by the end of the first year. So that's certainly of note. Aside from me, I was the actual lowest, having one province the whole game. But yeah, so that's that. Then at this point in the game, you can see End is maybe the biggest for a little bit. But there's a lot of people that are pretty tightly packed in here for province count. But we can see Yes first stick his head up here to be biggest. And he and End are kind of oscillating together growing up. Meanwhile, Vanarus is kind of bottom of the top of the pack in terms of province size by the mid game. While it's really End, and then for a little bit, while Ulm's war against Pythium starts and is going well before it gets thwarted, you can see Ulm is looking pretty okay. He's definitely in the top of the pack. And so here's where his war is going well, and it starts not going well versus Pythium, and then he gets ganked. I think that's kind of what this is. This is when Vanheim attacks. And then here was Ulm's gradual rise back up to kind of where he almost was before the war with Pythium even started. Like, if this is where the war with Pythium started, Ulm almost got back up to that province count by the end of the game. So just an extreme slog, which is kind of interesting. If we look at we'll go through. We've kind of been doing the summary. We'll finish the summary, I guess, and then we'll come back and look at each of the nations. Make sure I talk about each of them. But yeah, you can see it quickly became like by about here, Yis was in the position 1 in terms of provinces and never got off of it. Lost a little bit of ground here. I don't know if this was like Indies or what this was. This particular down hump, but yeah. You can see, like, you talk about position 1, 2, whatever, way ahead. If we look at the next, by the end of the game, who were in, like, position, who's in position 2, basically it's Vanarus, End, and Jotunheim. But you kind of can't count Jotunheim, because for the majority of the part of the end of the game, he didn't have his capital, which is hilarious. But he was still pretty big, because he did a pretty good job raiding. If we look at Vanarus, the meteoric rise of Ysir at the end is when he was fighting Vanarus. So if we it's one of the things I want to look at. If we just compare these two players, they were of closer size than I thought at the start of the war, right? So this is, you can see obviously where the war starts because they have inverse graphs, which is the case for every war, basically, is that if you're in a 1v1 with somebody, you're going to have inverse graphs of each other in general. But yeah, you can see when the war started, Yis had a pretty sizable advantage. Um, in terms of income, though, it was a bit more stark because the land Yis owned was higher quality land. He had multiple capitals. Belarus just had one. So anyway, when the war started, Yis was way ahead, like 40% ahead in terms of income. And in terms of army size, and we'll come back and look at this later, the graph is even more drastic. And when you consider that, okay, some of Yis's stuff was chaff, like he had some of the Call of the Wind stuff, but he also had like the militia and stuff to siege things down. But he also had Morvarks, and he hadn't lost many Morvarks. He had not lost hardly any Morvarks all game. So a large I don't want to say like a large percentage, but he had a shit ton of Morvarks when he started his war with Vanarus right here. So I think this was the start of the war. Here was like the big battle they had, where it was the Chud Berserkers versus the Morvark stack. And it put a major dent in Vanarus, because I think a lot of the stuff he had left was like chaff. But you can see it was just a drop in the bucket, really, for Yis. So anyway, that was kind of interesting thing I just want to focus on. Coming back to provinces, though, let me turn all these back on. We'll make sure we talk about everybody. Okay, so coming back to provinces. So we've looked at Satis, we've looked at Ulm, we've looked at Pythium. Pythium was doing well, and then they deterred Ulm. They had a little bump, but they had been raided down, and they got turned into Yis pretty darn quick. Jotunheim, the province graph is deceiving because they raided really well. They stayed, they gained even a little bit out of the whole war with Ulm. They weren't losing ground, but they were definitely not winning anything, like the game. Bad grindy war. Vanarus we've looked at. Let's look at Bandarlog. So let's just have Vanarus and Bandarlog. We'll kind of look at these two together because this is kind of interesting story. So here you can see their graphs start diverging from each other. They start kind of being a mirror image. So Vanarus was gaining land. Bandarlog was losing it. This is when the war with Yis started. And so as Bandarlog started falling off, Yis didn't really pay much. As Vanarus started falling off from the war with Yis, Yis didn't pay too much attention to Bandarlog. So Bandarlog was able to get his feet back under him. And interestingly, Yis kind of outsurvived... Bandarlog kind of outsurvived Vanarus. It was a little bigger than him at the end of the game, which is kind of funny. Not that you get a prize for that. Okay. And next up we have End. So End got kind of big. And when did they start fighting Vanheim? It looks like right around here. You can tell once you've looked at enough of these graphs. You can tell just by saying, when did these graphs start being inverse of each other? And it's right here. You can tell this when the war started, because up, down, right? And then they come back. And you can see they just mirror each other basically throughout the rest of the game until like maybe right here. So anyway, if you're getting into the Dominion's graph reading art, we're looking at it here. But you can see during this period of time, they were expending a lot of resources. Like, in my opinion, like I can tell from looking at these graphs when you need to get out of a war in general. It's not always the same because there's other stuff. The other graph you have to look at is army size. Right, so normally, like when you're building up, you're like your army, your military power is rising. Right, and then they have the wars, and it goes down, which is not good. This was End losing his stuff. Here was them both losing their stuff. Both losing their stuff again. So, like, when you compare, like, the power level that they were here, I guess for Vanheim, he didn't actually lose that much power. I thought he lost more. Vanheim's lost power is mostly an opportunity. Because you can see, like, End never really got back the strength they had here. Like, here's kind of where the war ended. They kind of started building troops back up, I guess maybe to kind of help with Yis or something. But, like, major power decline over the course of this conflict. But it didn't play out if we look at the province graph. Like, spending tons of resources, foregoing any, future accumulation of power for a long, grindy war where nothing happened. And of course, it's easy to say this as a caster at the end, but I think I'll leave this to you if you think it was pretty obvious much earlier on, like maybe around here. So anyway, there's that story. So that was talking about End. Now we will talk about Nabaa. So Nabaa, unfortunately, they got kind of wiped out early. I think they're the first player after Atlantis to get wiped out. And yeah, Atlantis with their rise and fall. I think there's not too much to look at in the province graph there. And then Yiss, yeah, I mean Yiss. If we look at them, let's get just the big players left. So like Ulm, not Pythium, not Bandarlog, and okay. Like if we just look at it here and we start flashing the Yiss graph, you can see that they, like at this point in the game, Atlantis had been conquered, right? But they weren't necessarily, just from looking at size, the super scary one to be worried about. And even by the mid game, this by like turn 20 something, 22 or something, they're big. People are probably worried, but there's nothing that, just looking at province count, you're like, oh man, we have to be super worried. Now, there are strategic things about being an underwater nation where you have, significant portions of your empire that just aren't threatened, right? That means, that gets some additional value. Like those provinces are potentially worth more because you don't have to invest really in protecting them. Whereas every other thing that, produces value, you have to invest in protecting. Anyway. But then here's where the breakaway really starts. And this breakaway right here, I think this was when they ate Pythium. If we pull Pythium up. Yeah, it was really the fall of Pythium is really when the Yiss snowball started going out of control. That is really when the magic started happening. And this first Pythium fall, this was due to Ulm. The second Pythium fall, starting here, was due to Yiss. And really it was this hump here that... This is when the Yiss snowball really took off. And of course, these are the sorts of things that we can see now, but might not have been very clear to the players at the time. Though it might have been clear to some, it certainly wasn't clear to all. So then, yeah. But especially if you look at, like, one thing too we can look at is like the Vanarus calls for help. So I think it's reasonable. I think there's like what I would think if I were playing. If I were playing, first of all, I know these players. I would have been extremely concerned about Yiss. And when Vanarus was asking for help, I probably would be inclined to help. But I think, not knowing the players and not maybe having huge amounts of insight into how this would play out, at the very beginning of the Vanarus-Yiss conflict, you could maybe see that these two players are like position, 1 and then tied for 4th. You could be like, okay, let's let them grind into each other for a little bit. Now, in terms of income, the graph is more stark at this time. 4th is, a bit more distant. But you could see how that's reasonable. But very quickly into it, like 3 or 4 turns later, the cries from Vanarus that he's not going to make it are all of a sudden, like maybe the cries aren't credible at the very start, like when he first gets attacked, like right here. Like maybe right here you're like, okay, maybe the cries aren't credible. But if you have scouting networks, there's no restrictions on this game. People can send screenshots of whatever they want. This, I think by like here, like the cries become increasingly credible. And like by here, where Vanarus fought to the bitter end, man. And like by here, a lot of the fight has been taken out of Vanarus by this time. But to not listen to the call, it's extremely one-sided by this point. And I think this province graph's a little deceptive, again, because of the score graphs, because of the fact that Yiss can like all in on one front, because he's got most of his lands, protected by being in the water. And he's got a shit ton of Morvarks, which he's been building up all game. So he has like a way better bless and way better units that are, cap only and hard to mass, but he's got a shit ton of them. But, that being said, too, Yiss was not all in against Vanarus. He still had a bunch of stuff eating Satis at the same time as he was going on this rise against Vanarus, picking off the last few provinces of Satis. So, anyway. That is the province graph. Let's look at forts. Ind was the fort leader for a while. Followed by Yiss, who ended up surpassing him, as Ind got into his long stalemate of a grindy portion of his game. Next place was Vanheim. Vanheim had a fair amount of forts, but you can see nobody else had nearly as many forts. Fort graph's pretty important. A lot of times when you win games, you have a lot of forts. Some of that's because you're taking other people's forts. Some of that's because you're building a lot of your own. I think Yiss was doing both. Income. So Yiss pulls ahead in income a bit earlier than other nations, and a lot of this again is driven by the fact that he was taking capitals, which are pretty high income, and then there were some pretty juicy provinces on the coastline he chose to engage his war on, like all those farmlands and stuff near Satis. So he had pretty high value lands, even though he had a bit of a helpless. He was imprisoned Rainbow, so he's still able to take okay scales. I'm not actually sure what scales he took. It was one of the things that was, hidden to us as a Omniscience faction, what scales were in provinces. But, pulls away by the start of the Vanarus War. He was easily 30% above Vanarus. I would say probably closer to 40% above. So things went pretty good for him after that. And then, by the middle of it, he was easily double, like almost close to triple by the middle of it. Next place in terms of income was Ind, who remained pretty rich, but he and Vanheim swapped places for the next many turns, with Jotunheim behind him and Ulm behind them. And then Vanarus, who was in a pretty good position. By income, he was really in position 4. And by the time he started going, the war with Yiss started, he was in position 4 for income. Which was kind of my feeling when I was casting. I didn't really, not all the graphs were showing up, but I kind of felt by this point in the game Vanarus was at position 4. If I had to rank him, that's where I would have put him. I think, in Yiss's final message, he was saying that he was most concerned, as a long-term threat about Vanarus. And I think Vanarus has a lot of cool tools, and they can do a lot of cool things. And the player for Vanarus is very good. But, I don't think Vanarus was... I think Vanarus wasn't... really it's tied for 4th, but he was the most 4th of the 4th players. Anyway... Then, Jotunheim, pretty good on income. We've already talked about that. Bandarlog with the Resurgence. I don't think there's anything in particular to note at the beginning. So that's income. Gym income. This I haven't seen before, because this graph was completely hidden to me. Because, our spies were not able to see magic score graphs. So... Pythium, actually pretty good for a large portion of the game on gym income. He was like a gym income leader for a while. He had the war go south, and then things kind of fell off quickly there. I'm not sure what this bump was. I don't know if he had I don't know if he had a global for a little bit or what this was. But right behind him was Yiss. Yiss must have been site searching like crazy. Or no, this isn't Yiss. This is Vanarus. Oh my god. So Vanarus had top-notch. The color's similar. I assumed it was Yiss. So Vanarus was actually the gym income leader. How about that? So this is one measure. And you can obviously see where the war starts, because, again, the inverse things. The inverse lines. But, they were basically tied in gym income when the war started. But interesting. But for a long period of time, which is going to lead to, the area under the curve is how many gyms you get. And, if we just look at these two, by the time the war started, Vanarus had accumulated a pretty significant, area under the curve advantage over Yiss. So he'd probably accumulated significantly more gems than Yiss did by that point. But by the time they actually started fighting, their gem income was... Yiss was probably ahead a tiny bit. But also, Yiss was paying gold, which he had a ton of compared to other players. He was paying gold for cheap items from Ulm and for gems from Ulm. So I don't know how much that would make up for this difference, but it was probably a significant factor. Because Ulm was basically having to bankroll a significant portion of his economy from like here to probably here. Or no, from here to like here by trading stuff to Yiss. So that definitely helped make up for any kind of like gold gem difference that Yiss had with Vanarus. Anything else of note for the gems? Who are the other runner-ups? Vanheim had a pretty solid gem income. And had not much. And I think, while Ent had a lot of land, they were really low on gems. And I think that had to do with magic diversity. Magic diversity is not really Ent's greatest strength. And it's not one of the nations I understand super well. I know they have bitch mothers with nature and blood. And then they've got their cat mages, which are like small amounts of fire and earth and astral. And then maybe they have some other paths. Like they might get a small smattering of paths, but I don't think site searching is a strength of End. And that kind of shows up in their graph. Ulm, really very bad gem income. Makes up for it a little bit, like by the time we get here, but then when he starts getting kind of all this territory taken from him, it kind of falls off. But I think he had forted... It looks like he's forted a lot of the provinces that had the better gem income. So even though he was getting raided to hell, if you have a fort on a province, you still get all the gems. So his gem dive was not nearly as deep as his income dive through the war. So I guess he had that going for him the whole time. But again, Ulm is not a nation known for, magic diversity and path access. So never really a front runner in gems. So that is Ulm. Anything else of note here? Bandar Log actually super solid all the way through the end of the game on gems. I guess, one of the things Vanarus was talking about is like he didn't understand why why Bandar Log forted certain provinces. It seems to be that if Bandar Log saw a province with good gems on it, he was like, we're putting a fort there. And I think that might have been why he overbuilt. I think he just saw provinces that had gem income. He wanted to protect it. He put forts on it, and he just didn't have enough gold to put labs and temples in all those forts and upgrade them. And so anyway, he, had no mages when he needed them in the war with Vanarus. But still, major gem contender for the whole game. Like, by the end of the game, like, you would never think this. He had as much gem income as Ulm did, or more. Like, for the last quarter, third of the game. I mean, almost as much as Jotunheim, right? And Jotunheim was like a significant kind of big player. It's kind of crazy to think about. So there's that. We might have missed something else. In terms of research, this is another graph that's a complete mystery. We had, to me, because it's my first time seeing it. So let's take a look. The leader for research for most of the game was Vanarus. So I would say that adds to Yiss's argument that he was a major threat. He did have excellent research. And he put it to pretty good use in some of those battles. We saw Marble Warriors. We saw, a lot of items being forged. Yeah, he was a leader. You can tell, his research starts falling off as he starts having to use all his mages in war. But yeah, he was a major research leader for a large portion of the war. For a large portion of the game. So, yeah, that's interesting. Next up was Pythium until... Next up was Pythium until they fell off. And then beneath them was Ulm. And Ulm, of course, can really crank researchers, especially if they get the. Ulm really should be first in research in a lot of games if they get the right randoms and they can get some gems coming in. But really, it's about getting to. If you get construction 6 early and you have a decent fire income, you can be like off the charts in terms of research. It doesn't look like that really happened for him, but he was still, solid, second place for a while in research. But you can again tell when he started to have, having to mobilize a lot of mages or not having money to buy more. And the line just is basically flat for the rest of the game, doesn't continue inflecting up. So that is the research graph for Ulm. Jotunheim, kind of bottom of the pack from everybody else. And, he started having to deploy a lot of his Scrotty out raiding, right? So they're expensive. They're slow to recruit. He had, had to get more of them, so he wasn't getting more researchers. And yeah, his research was pretty slow here at the end. And then he lost a lot of mages fighting Ulm. And then there was like the middle of the pack. The middle of the pack was End and Vanarus in Ulm, right? And Yis became top of the pack, but Yis was really just, he was bottom of the pack for a while, right? So horrible on research for a while, like the lowest, right? Until pretty late in the game. Like this is like this would be turn 30. He's the lowest in research. I mean, just horrible research. And just totally leaning on these knights, the Morvark Knights. Yeah. But Morvark Knights are units that can carry you through the early mid-game for sure. So anyway, that's kind of interesting. But you can see as because he starts, you have to look at the fort graph when you're also looking at this. About this time, when he was really low in research, he was also starting to become really high in forts. And as the forts went up, and he started getting tons of mages per turn, oh boy did that research graph tilt up. And you can see it just inflects up, and he's clearly the research leader by the end. And it ended up mattering. He ended up using a lot of high-tech things to win with reasonably small groups of units at the end because he had a tech advantage. Like golems and stuff coming out. The golems are not low tech, right? He had golems and fog warriors and a bunch of high-tech things at the end. End was third highest in research. I felt like I never really saw it. I didn't see the mages of End do that much. We saw Soulslay Communions. I think he might have Fog Warriors once. I can't remember. Never Willed to Fate or anything. I don't know. Yeah, I'm not sure what End's research priorities were because we never really got to see much of it in action. But they had done a lot of it. Okay, Dominion. Sometimes interesting. We can see End crushing Dominion for a long time. And End can control Dominion very well. They have heretics they can use. And then they obviously get a fair number of preachers too. And End forted up pretty well. So he had a lot of forts and temples. So all good ways to control Dominion. Later was surpassed by Yis. Low people on the totem pole for Dominion was Bandarlog. And this actually feeds back into that Vanarus comment from way back when. Where Bandarlog had a bunch of forts and labs, but not a lot of temples. Which means he can't actually recruit his mages. So that also feeds into a low Dominion graph, which they had a pretty strong bless, so they might not have been super concerned about pushing their scales out to all their provinces, but anyway, there's that. Vanarus pretty solid on Dominion throughout basically the whole game. Vanheim pretty solid on Dominion. Ulm, who doesn't really have a large incentive to build a lot of temples, except, if you play Ulm Scales, which you do, you typically want to push your scales. So usually with Ulm, I think you do it more with like preachers and stuff than necessarily having to build forts everywhere, temples everywhere. But yeah, you can see his Dominion was never terribly high. Army size. This is one of the things that just tells a ton. And we've seen parts of this, but we've never had, like the graphs are always kind of missing. So We'll go over some of the major conflicts. Let's do the Atlantis Yis one to start with. So you can see Atlantis just had a ton of troops. Some of these were mercs. Had a ton. This must have been the loss of the fight at the capital. And he actually had more troops than Yis, but Yis, I guess, was just making more Varks. And then here was the final battle for the cap. But meanwhile, Yis was just making shit tons of troops to siege down stuff. So, I guess that's not a terribly revealing war. Next, if we look at Satis, Satis you could see had a good troop build-up. You know, we had issues with exactly the types of troops he built, but anyway, good troop built up. And he ended up fighting with... oh god, who did he fight with? Pythium. But this probably wasn't when he lost a ton of dudes. Who did he lose a ton of dudes to? It wouldn't have been Ind, because Ind and Nabaa were fighting. Ind, Jotunheim, and Nabaa were fighting. It would have been Vanheim. It was also fighting Satis. I think that was it. So I don't know what he lost a ton of these troops here to. I don't exactly remember this moment. But he got completely smoked here. But I guess, I mean, this is the same turn Pythium lost a ton. So I guess Pythium just completely smoked this stack from Yis. Or from Satis. I don't remember this battle. But presumably it happened. And then, yeah, it was just a downward slide from Satis. So I can see, you know, one of the things I was questioning in this was like, you know, Pythium did his death march into Satis, where he was just like determined to kill them. And I guess he had made a reasonably good assessment of the military power left of Satis. Because Satis definitely was in like death throes as he was going on his victory march. But what he made a very poor assessment of was the degree to which he would hold off Ulm and the feistiness of Yis. Because he definitely was not able to defend any of the stuff he took. But yeah, Satis was super beaten down. And then Satis made a little bit of a comeback, and then they had the final battles with Yis here. Vanheim, you can see they lost nothing in the Satis war, even though they got some of this property here. So there's that. So anyway, these two players were eliminated. Then if we look at the tragic trio of Ulm, Jotunheim, and Vanheim. Vanheim, kind of building up an army. Here's when Ulm just lost this enormous army at Pythium's doorstep, right? And this was the trigger of these guys ending their naps to come in and put that dagger right between Ulm's shoulder blades. Ulm was quickly building back up his forces, though, and basically put them all into a doom stack. And you can see the Ulm army graph bears almost no correlation to his province graph, right? Because he just kind of doom stacked up and trundled into Jotunheim. But we can see, like here, Jotunheim. This is when Jotunheim, I think, lost the first fort battle, where Ulm killed just a ton of mages and a bunch of Scrati. Devastating defeat for Jotunheim right here. Ulm just lost a tiny bit of stuff. But Ulm was losing, like, people doing grading and counter raiding all throughout this time, and his army was taking, pot shots because it was always on the move marching into Jotunheim. It did get kind of gradually ground down. As Ulm started, at least being able to keep his forts from being sieged, he was able to slowly build his army graph back up, but then he had these kind of devastating hits here with like Murdering Winter and the other following battles where his main army was ground down, but he still had a fair amount of troops that he had been building in his fort. So anyway, but it's interesting when you look at these two, because you can see like this, in some ways this is a measure of Ulm's military power. Now in other ways your military power is going to improve as your research does, but in some ways like this is the peak of Ulm military power when he marched into Pythium. He never had as many troops, really. I mean, he got back up to it for short periods of time. He never had as many troops as he did right there. And if you were to tell Ulm when he was marching into Pythium, the game is going to go for 30 more turns, and you are never going to have as many troops as you have right now. That would be like a super harrowing thing to tell him, because he was probably feeling right on top of the world this turn. But he would never have as many troops as he had this turn, really. Vanheim, they had a pretty good build-up. You know, here's when the war started with Ulm. He kept building up troops. Things were looking great for Vanheim for a while. Like, this war, the war with Ulm did seem to make a lot. I mean, we can talk about other things Vanheim could have done, and we will once we're done with the score graphs. But from a score graph perspective, the war with Ulm was great for Vanheim. He got a ton of territory and held on to it for a really long time. So that was all great. Problem was he didn't get anywhere close to doing a killing blow to Ulm. But fortunately for him, Ulm was more fixated with Jotunheim than he was with Vanheim. So anyway. Vanheim continues to build up military power, but here you can see this one he had a devastating loss here against Ind. We'll flash up Ind's graph. Right, their army sizes just got completely crushed. Here's where Ind lost a big army, and Vanheim was feeling king of the world because he just crushed this huge Ind army. Because you remember, Ind was attacking Vanheim, right? And here this is on Ind's capital, and they both lost just a tremendous amount of stuff. Like, poor Ind, like just completely battered down. And then they're both kind of rebuilding, but boom, they both get battered down again. I think this was the turn when they had said, like, oh, we'll form a coalition, and this is like my air quotes coalition, the like 6 air quoted coalition, because they still even attacked each other the turn they said they would form a coalition. Because they couldn't agree on who got a fort. Anyway, and then they're just beaten to hell, and they start rebuilding, but, anyway. So there's that. Let's get rid of Ind here. Looking at Jotunheim again. Do you guys look at score graphs in your game, like, while you're playing? I look at score graphs all the time in my game, and it's not even just for casting. Sometimes I just need something to, like... They're very objective in kind of just saying, like, this is where you are. It's good to kind of snap brain cells in your head loose. From whatever position they were fixed in. Sometimes it makes you ask the question, okay, am I doing this right or am I doing this wrong? If you're doing it wrong, you got to do something different. If you're doing it right, like sometimes you're doing it right, but it doesn't feel right. Like you're in really bad diplomacy, you're getting 2v1'd, it feels horrible, you're really stressed, but all your graphs look good. And you're like, okay, we're fine. We feel like we're in chaos, but we're fine. Anyway. I do like, which is kind of funny, because I don't really like no other game have I ever really looked at score graphs. And then Dominion, like you play a strategy game or whatever, and it's like at the end it shows you your score graphs, and you're like, click, 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 okay, fine. This is like very interesting in my opinion. Anyway. Okay, and yeah, Jotunheim, he basically peaks right here. Where was his battle he lost against Ulm? This was Ulm on Pythium. This was Jotunheim on Ulm. Then he kind of builds back up. I think this was when he lost his cap. This was him losing all those troops there. And then he kind of builds back up. He had a huge amount of troops, though, that were never really deployed. I don't know where all these were. I don't know if these were Veti sitting in his forts. He could have been using these to siege down his capital. This is a lot of troops here, like this area under the curve. Now, some of these are going to be mages that were just sitting around researching, right? But a significant portion of his troops, I feel like he probably could have, maybe he's worried about abandoning some borders, but he probably could have, I don't think you care about that when your cap is belonging to someone else. He probably could have sieged that fort down way faster. So that's that. The next conflict, we'll look at Vanarus and Bandarlog. So yeah, here's where Bandarlog, I think this was where Ernest killed an army. Was that this battle? I think it was Ernest and some thugs, and they just killed a bunch of Bandar stuff. I think that's what this turn was. So anyway, yeah, Bandar kind of wrecked after this. But from the province graph, this was like the turning point in the war. It was kind of like they were piddling around with each other for a little bit, and I think this was the turn a lot of thugs in earnest came out and killed just a ton of stuff. And one way to look at it is like forcing it. You have like forces that get applied, and that those create accelerations, and the accelerations produce changes in velocity. And so like basically the acceleration drives velocity. But army size drives provinces, right? So we have a big change in army size here, and that drives big changes in provinces, right? So the army size is kind of like a leading indicator of provinces anyway. But yeah, Bandar loses this, and then that's basically the trigger for all hell breaking loose in the war with Vanarus. So the provinces are going up. Bannerlog still has a fair amount of troops through this whole thing compared to like his original. I don't know why he didn't mobilize more of them. I don't know. Maybe this isn't that many. I mean, the score graph doesn't even go up that high for this graph. Like if we put all the other players on, it'll end somewhere up here. Oh. I don't know. Because this says Bandarlog had like a pretty decent army all throughout this period. I don't know what it was. I mean, we saw some of them running around kind of towards the end as he would retake things, but anyway. So that is Bandarlog and Vanarus. If we switch to Vanarus and Ys, their war started right around here, I think, if we look at the province graph. Right here. So the armies didn't really trade. It was a lot of this pokey kind of raiding stuff at the beginning and killing of thugs and this, that, and the other. And then here was the big battle they had where Ys lost a fair amount of Morvarks and Vanarus lost a bunch of his Chud Berserkers. And this was really the turning point in the war for Vanarus. Though Ys also didn't really go gangbusters after this, because Ys had lost a lot, and with Sea of Ice up, it was a little tricky for him to reinforce his position. And this actually, by the way, is a fight I think Vanarus could have won. And if Vanarus had won this, it would have actually slowed down Ys. I don't know how much it would have changed the outcome of this particular war. But, you can see after this, because of all the raiding pressure, it's difficult for Vanarus to recruit troops. Before this war is the highest army size Vanarus is going to have for the rest of the game. And after this, he's trying to recruit stuff, but he's upkeep constrained. He can't even buy more troops. Right? So then it's just a gradual bleeding off. Whereas Ys is rich as shit, and he's just getting more and more and more stuff. So that's the army graph for that. And I think we've now covered Nabaa we haven't looked at. So let's look at Nabaa and End and Jotunheim. And Nabaa doing pretty well in troop size, like the biggest actually coming into this early war. But a lot of his troops are camel riders, and camel riders kind of suck in the face of resistance on their own. They're kind of gimmicky. They're decent for raiding, but anything that's kind of hard to kill, camel riders don't typically do very well with it in my experience. But they can hold people in place with their little birdies for you to kill them with other stuff. And Nabaa can do flaming arrows and wind guide and stuff. So, I mean, there are things you can do with them, but I don't think we saw any of that this game. Anyway, so we've got, them losing a battle here, and then they kind of, where did their provinces go down? Yeah, it's always a little concerning when you see your province graph going way down before your army graph goes way down. Because it means you've got armies that you're not using to defend your territory. You're using your armies to stay alive. Right? Like his armies he was still a lot here. I guess I know he was raiding with a lot of them, but maybe he had some running around or hiding in his capital. Because like by the time he has this big army size drop, I mean, he's down to like one province. that's never a good sign. That's not, in my opinion, how you want to play. But anyway, that's just my opinion. So anyway, that was Nabaa. Atlantis we already looked at. I think we already looked at Yes, but we'll just flash them up. Basically, they have all, like, look for a down tick. Try to find a down tick in this whole portion of the war. There's a tiny, tiny one here. This is him taking Pythium. But this is like fighting all of Pythium's troops, I think, at the end. I mean, all his mage corps. And he lost a few guys, but not a ton. And he probably wasn't even recruiting that much stuff because he had just taken so much stuff on the coast. He was probably putting money into, like, forting things up here. This is the first real black eye he gets, and this is versus Vanarus. He takes a few other losses, I think, versus Vanarus, where, you know, thugs or something pick off an army around here. But basically, very, very few black eyes being dealt. But the army grows and grows and grows and grows. Army size graph, I think, one of the most important graphs. Like, if you feel you're winning, your army graph should be going up. If you feel, if you see for the past 10 terms like your army graph size going down, try to get out of whatever situation you're in a lot of times. There are situations where your army graph will go down and it's okay, but a lot of times it's not okay. And most every game I've won, I look back and I see my army graph size in general going up. But it's important too, because a lot of times, like, you'll have a loss, and like this loss, you know, like maybe somebody's feeling really bad about it, but you're like, it's okay. We're on a major upward trend, right? But if you start getting on a major downward trend, you're in trouble. It also, too, you know, might suggest you need to put more in troops. Like, you start going down a line, you're like, okay, we might have to shut off a little, you know, a little mage production or something then to get more troops. But, you know, mages can also just be better bang for your buck than troops are, too. So you might not do that either. Anyway, that's army size. And then ascension points. We'll go ahead and put everybody back in. Yes didn't claim all his thrones, which I guess helped people believe that maybe there wasn't an immediate problem. But some of these were legitimately rushed. Like, you know, he rushed 2 of these at the end. But, you know, he had 4 of them for a pretty good long time before the end. Anyway. I think that's it for the score graphs. In terms of my thoughts, I think what Yiss said was probably correct. One of the main reasons he won is because he won all his wars decisively and quickly. And winning your wars decisively and quickly is very, very important in this game. It's extremely important in the game. Ideally, if you get to choose, and if you're a water nation, you often do, you pick a war where you get to have a fast, decisive engagement where you conquer them and you take all their stuff and it's now yours. Right? So that is ideally how it works for you. Unfortunately, though, that doesn't always get to happen. Sometimes either people attack you and it's not a war you want to be in, so you have to kill their stuff and convince them it's not a war they want to be in either. Or you pick a target and you think it's going to be a good war, and it turns out you miscalculated or they did something surprising and it's not a good war and you have to get out. Figuring that out quickly is also another very important part of Dominions. And, you know, with nothing else, Pythium was probably set up to have a quick war against Satis, but they got backstabbed. But they were pretty much mulching Satis. Vanarus did not have a quick war against Bandarlog. They were winning decidedly and decisively, but they had major setbacks along the way. And had those not been there, he may have finished in time. And also, it was not a fast war. Like, he wasn't sieging things quickly. It was a pretty slow war. The war against Nabaa was pretty fast, so that was good. That was the other fast war that took place this game from other players that were not Yiss. The war with Pythium was quick, but it was quick in the sense that Actually, even that it wasn't. Like, Ulm, when he pushed into Pythium and his stuff died, he wasn't like, okay, let's peace out with Pythium. He was like, let's keep all this stuff, and like continue fighting, which, I guess kind of makes sense because you want to keep the land you got. And I guess from that perspective too, it made Ulm like okay with Yiss taking a bunch of Pythium stuff. But I think we can see how that played out. Anyway, not a quick war. I mean, kind of a quick war in that it became a war people got out of. Interestingly, and worth pointing out, these indies survived the entire game, if you can believe it. Yeah, I don't think they were ever conquered. When can you say that about a game you've been in? Indies survived. The mighty Ichthids and the mighty Amber Clan. Amber Clan are really good too because they're going to give you a water mage. So like it's a major path access thing. If you can get a thug underwater to take this, you break you into a new path. Would have been really good for Ulm. Would have been really good for Vanheim. Okay. Yeah. So reflecting on it, fast wars win you the game. Getting out of bad wars quickly helps keep you from losing the game. And that was probably the major single thing that Yiss did well, and then other players didn't do so well. Yiss had the luxury of picking his wars, I think, more than the other players, because he didn't have to worry about his flanks very much. Yeah, so there's that. I think in terms of diplomacy, there were a few points where if Atlantis had even lost more slowly to Yiss, it would have been potentially a different war. Like, he was kind of on the clock because there was going to be gear and stuff coming out, and you don't want to have your monster fighting into Yiss thugs with gear on them. So he was kind of on the clock, but his god, while in his dominion and also in the presence of his army, was probably even going to be able to kill like Yissian thugs and stuff. I'm not totally sure, but I think with priest support he probably would have. So I don't know. I'm not sure. I don't really. I mean, it's a kind of gimmicky thing rushing somebody. And I never felt very comfortable like with what I would do if I were trying to do that strategy as Atlantis. I'm not really in love with that strategy. But I think like the turn that Atlantis actually did die, invading Yiss, I think it was pretty obvious that was a bad plan that turn. And if he could have kept his army, like his god, with his army and have the priests all at the same time, I don't know if Yiss could have done much. But Yiss managed to kill the army, mostly with the PD, and then later killed the god without any support. But that was one thing. Like the game could have gone potentially different ways depending on how Atlantis had done it. And that was like the first thing to just set it like a little bit of a snowball in motion. Yiss was the first nation to have 2 caps. But he wasn't terribly big because his expansion was completely crippled by Atlantis rushing him. So anyway, that was a thing. And after that, he went in to take Satis because he's got a poison resistance bless and he's got Morvarks which can clear skeletons out. And like, what else is middle-aged Satis gonna do? The only thing middle-aged Satis could have done to maybe survive is just have shit tons of elite warriors. And elite warriors are very, very good at trading with elite units. So anyway, that's the thing. I don't know how well that would have worked. And maybe Satis, I don't think it's a net troop, do they? No, they don't. But I feel like that probably would have been the best way to deal with it. But anyway, I mean, he didn't have any of that. The other thing that Satis can do is they can just be, you can ignore a lot of these guys and just get the shamans and then just be an astral powerhouse. And certainly luck fluffed elite warriors would have traded pretty okay with Morvarks, I think. And like, if you remember, by the time Yiss was invading Satis, Yiss had like no research, right? So there wasn't going to be, super crazy shit that Yiss did. But it wasn't really just Yiss for Satis. Other people were attacking Satis, like Pythium. But Um, yeah. I don't know. Anyway, the stuff Satis did wasn't terribly effective. Like, he lost a huge stack against Pythium. Foul Vapors would have been good against Pythium. So, like, the Enchantment Rush, which is typically what you do with Satis, would have been good versus Pythium, was not going to be effective at all. Like, Enchantment not effective at all against Yis. What was going to be effective, though, was going to be, like, getting up to Protection 4 and, getting up to Alteration 4 or 3 at least to do luck spam. I was saying 4 for, like, I forget what Protection is. Protection might be 3. But even just doing like Cheat Fate and Luck or Body Ethereal, not so much. Just I think Cheat Fate and Luck and getting that on a shit ton of Elite Warriors. If you can get up to do Battle Fortune, all the better. And running those into a bunch of Morvarks be pretty good. But it's a little bit like who are you fighting? Because the alteration stuff not going to be great against Pythium, but would be for Yis. But a shit ton of Elite Warriors would be good against both players. So, anyway, I think, Satis... I never really felt like the game plan for Satis really came together. But that was a completely one-sided engagement for Yis, where you had a bunch of really good land, like all this land for free. Or without losing anything. I mean, he committed things to win the fight. And he wasn't doing anything terribly fancy at this point. It was just troops. And then next was Pythium to fall. And, of course, in both of these engagements, it was not a 1v1. Now, Yis said, and I believe the player, that they were going to get a war with Satis whether anybody was attacking them or not. And I think that made sense. I don't think it was necessarily going to be a one-sided matchup, like if Satis did things I was talking about, but Satis clearly wasn't doing the things I was talking about. He didn't have very many Elite Warriors at all. It's possible, though, Repel would have been good against them because they don't have great morale, but I think it's a length 4 lance. I just want to check real quick. Yeah, it'll be length 4 when they're large. So, and then they will get to repel against the Elite Warriors because it's length 3. Anyway, you could potentially send these guys Berserk with Enrage, or I think there's a nature spell that makes you go Berserk. Maybe not. Anyway, throw enough Elite Warriors at problems, and they tend to, if not go away, at least reduce in size. And the 2 attacks does make it pretty good against defensive type units. So, yeah, that was, I think, if you look at it, Yis never really ended up getting in a truly 1v1. Satis mostly expended himself on Pythium, and Yis kind of got unprotected lands while Satis was busy dealing with Pythium. And then once Satis was completely exhausted, Yis came back in and finished him off. As for Pythium, Pythium, I guess, trusted that Yis wouldn't eat him. And was very confident that Ulm wouldn't make too much progress. I think the confidence that Ulm wouldn't make too much progress ended up being kind of well placed, and he thought he could finish off Satis while also dealing with Pythium. The latter turned out to not be true. He was not able to finish off Satis while holding off Ulm. He was able to hold off Ulm, but he was not able to finish off Satis. He took a pretty major loss here, trying to take Satis's capital. And I think lost a few more troops too, also fighting Satis in the general raiding fight. And that was the trigger for Yis to invade him. And I think he was talking with Yis, and they were I remember getting some messages from Pythium. So they were having kind of okay diplomacy, and that might have been, made him assume that means we're safe. Like they're not going to attack me. No. No, little Pythium. That was not the case. you started giving off prey vibes, and the predator deep inside of him welled, and yeah, you got eaten. So, I think it's always worth saying, like, how well am I really positioned to take the land that I'm about to take? And if you don't take things decisively, like where you're leaving, like if you take something and then your military is mostly wiped out with what you just took it with, then you're probably not in a very great position to defend it once you've taken it. And especially if you don't have naps with your neighbors, like the new neighbors you're going to have, and they may want to move in. Taking a bunch of land but not having any troops to defend it for the next 5 or 6 turns, pretty risky. And I think we can see how that played out here. And then, yeah, Pythium fell. He had some interesting ideas for kind of a communion. I think Yis mentioned he probably could have magic dueled his anti-magic caster, but I mean, he also just had lost too much. I think if he had all those mages with a bunch of troops, like on guard commander screening, it's pretty hard for Yis to like grind. And again, Yis at this point did not have very good research. He was starting to get some research, so he had some, but you know, like he had anti-magic and stuff. But if he had a bunch of troops on guard commander, it would be very hard. And Morvarks are very killy, so they grind through troops pretty fast. But, you know, drop luck on a bunch of them, especially Pythium had very good research. You know, maybe Battle Fortune if you can. And then starts dropping Soul Slays. It's very possible that if Pythium wasn't depleted from having fought Ulm and then also failing to capture Satis and actually had all those troops, that he would have had a mage ball that Yis could not have dealt with. And I think, and I think at the time I was saying too, one of the reasons I think for Ulm piecing out with Pythium, like as soon as his rush on the capital failed, because he probably could have given Pythium terms like, okay, you get your cap circle back and go deal with Yis, and you know, I'll take a little bit of stuff out of it. And Pythium might have been okay with it. He might not have. And even if he wasn't okay, as Ulm, I think I would have been okay with original borders. The other thing with piecing out with Pythium too is it's a signal to the other players that you're not in it's not a 3v1. It's definitely only a 2v1. That probably wouldn't have stopped the two of them from attacking though. But it would certainly give Pythium the peace of mind to prepare for Yis. Though potentially Pythium would be in the frame of mind, okay, I have to go finish Satis off now. But that's probably not how it would have worked. But anyway, with the research as it was, if Pythium didn't lose much from fighting other players, Yis probably wouldn't have been able to make much progress. But that's why Yis attacked them. There was an opportunity created by all the players in the game, and Yis said, thank you. We will use that opportunity to our advantage. And that's really kind of what happened again and again and again. So it happened here. It happened here. The next step in the chain was Vanheim chose not to capture Satis. Instead, he decided to attack Ulm in conjunction with Jotunheim. And I think, like, when you look, when did the ball really start rolling? The ball really started rolling when, Pythium got captured. So it started with Ulm's failed attack on Pythium, which massively depleted Pythium. And with Pythium's decision to continue conquering Satis when Ulm attacked them. I think if either of those didn't happen, like either if Ulm didn't attack Pythium, or if Pythium didn't deplete their forces, then certainly this pen wouldn't have fallen over. That doesn't mean Yis would have gone into a war against Pythium, it just means he would have waited for probably a different opportunity. But in this particular case, these were kind of the things that first started falling. And then Vanheim choosing to go after Ulm instead of securing Satis basically left it to Yis. It's like a free gift to Yis. Do you want this capital? And Vanheim had poison resistance in their Bless. They had a lot of sacreds. They could summon air elementals, which are going to squish a shit ton of skeletons. They had priests that could banish the skeletons. I think they had every reason to go finish these guys off. I'm not sure why they didn't. I mean, well, we know why. They felt like they needed to go attack Ulm. And it did end up paying off in a way. Like, they got pretty rich off of it. So I can understand that. And they basically got all these lands and they didn't have to give it back. But, yeah. Came at a cost, though, giving a cap and then a bunch of provinces to the game leader. Because at the time Pythium fell, which is when they made the decision, like, they made the decision as Pythium was going to Yis. That is really when Pythium, he was on this was his third capital. And when they made that decision, they were also making the decision to freely hand over the fourth capital to Yis, which was going to be Satis. Which, yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's always easy to Monday morning quarterback, but from having played a lot of games with Saturday, pretty sure he wasn't going to go down very quickly to a 2v1. And Vanheim never got a second cap, whereas this one was just here for the taking. So I think this was like the second, the first major pin tumbling was this one, with Pythium falling. I mean, there were other things that happened before. The second major pin tumbling was Vanheim not going after Satis. And the third was when Vanarus, who was I think when we look at it, he was in a position 4, maybe position 2 or 3. I think you could argue anywhere position 2 to 4. But however you argue, he was pretty distant behind Yis. Like, when they finally started fighting, if we look at all the different graphs, when they finally started fighting right here, in terms of research here, Vanarus was ahead, so he had a clear research advantage. This is the one thing that when they started fighting, Vanarus had, like, very clearly an advantage. But by this time, Yis had broken out of his really horrible early game research, and he had a lot of important mid-game research done, but he was still significantly behind. So this is the one trait where you could say, okay, maybe it's not position 1 versus position 2. Provinces, Yis is significantly ahead. Income, Yis is significantly, like, way significantly ahead. Gym income they were tied on, but again, Vanarus had more area under the curve. So this is the other one where they're kind of tied. And then army size, which I think is the other really important one. Yis is way, way ahead, right? And it's not just quantity, it's also quality. Like, Vanarus has better chaff than Yis, but Yis had just, like, obviously way better sacreds. So, and while this was happening, while he was fighting Vanarus, he was also at the same time taking, easily taking the last bit of Satis. So, this was kind of the third thing, is when Vanarus started falling, and to me as an observer, without any of the fog of war, it's extremely clear, and I think to all of you watching, right, it was very clear, hey, he needed help immediately. And the only people who could really help him were Ind and Vanheim. These were the main players who could help, right? Ind and Vanheim. Ulm could help if he got out of the war with Vanheim and he got his old land back, which would give him access to Pythium. Right? But in all likelihood, what would happen is Ulm would be in this 1v1 with Jotunheim, right? And then these guys would fight. So that was kind of, when we talk about, like, the third point where the game kind of, the fate became much more decided, when it was very clear, like after 2 or 3 turns in the war with between Yis and Vanarus, that Vanarus was going to get his ass kicked. It was about that time that Ind decided to invade Vanheim to help Ulm, which was a situation that Ulm had diplomatically engineered. So in some ways, Ulm started turning down the final of the doomsday clocks. He started ticking it by engineering this plan to get Ind to help attacking Vanheim. And this was just a horrible war for Ind. Uh, they didn't get any real land out of it. They spent a ton of troops. They lost a lot of mages. They almost lost their cap. I mean, they lost the battle outside their cap, and only having their god inside the cap saved them. So it could have gone even worse. And at no point did they ever want to get out. And we heard about it, from Vanheim. We heard about it from Ind. Nobody wanted to get out of this war. And it was clearly a horrible war for everybody involved. But this war, which blocked... These were the two players that needed to join in a coalition to take some action against Ys. And potentially save Venerus, because Venerus was going to be the fifth capital. This war was the final stroke of the final tolling of the doomsday clock, at which point kind of fates were going to be sealed. And I think by the time we get to the actual throne rush, like once Venerus fell, and like the actual taking of the thrones, like Ys was extremely crisp in execution and how he did it, and Magic Phase popped the guard so you couldn't see what was in the army on the outside, and did crumble on the fort so he could even take it without having a ton of troops. Like, that was just kind of like a finesse styling victory. I mean, there were huge reserves of mages and troops. If they had managed to hold off the throne rush, which it seems people were like, I can only trust the coalition will hold the throne rush off or something, like, and again, it's the air quotes coalition, but like, that was the finesse play to end it. Like, there were deep pockets, right? Like, the game, by this point, like, people were like, I hope, like, the game had spiraled deep out of control by this point of the game. Like, deeply, deeply, deeply out of control. Like, they're like, here people are like, we might need to form a coalition. It's like, you think. So anyway, that was the final tolling of the Doomsday Clock, was this this diplomacy. And it started with the attack of Vanheim and Utgard on Ulm, which involved freely giving away Satis. So that was the second toll, was really the freely giving away of Satis. And then the attack in on Ulm. But at that point, everything was still recoverable. If Ind had not gotten involved in this war, he could have just done it with Venerus. And they probably might have been able to drive, especially with Sea of Ice up. The two of them might have been able to kind of drive Ys to a stalemate. And that might have been okay. It depends, obviously, how well Ys was able to plan battles. But that would have left Ulm to kind of fight this 2v1 with the full attention of Vanheim. And he probably would have fallen, I think. Because Vanheim had big armies. And I don't think, with Ulm doom stacking off to fight Jotunheim, if Ind hadn't gotten involved, I don't think he could have done that. I think he would have kind of gotten picked apart. And in that other world, where Vanheim continued to solely focus on Ulm, I think most of these forts probably would have fallen. Vanheim would have all of this. Ind would have had to have helped Venerus, started fighting some. These guys would have become worn down. And then, Vanheim might have joined later. And it may or may not have been too late at that point. Like, maybe, depending on how the war went, maybe he would have still been able to launch like a major attack through here and fight Ys while, Venerus hadn't been completely depleted, and, Ind was at least stalemating him, and they were both kind of depleting resources. But the other, I think we'll close by just looking at the army graph. While everybody else was in grindy wars getting weaker, like, you can just see, like, just look at the trend here, like the downwards kind of trend for most of this portion of the game. Everybody here is getting weaker, one player is getting stronger, right? This is the military power. This is what was happening. They were all killing each other's shit while one person was getting stronger. And not only were they getting stronger with military, they also were getting more territory. So anyway, that's how it played out. So I think with this series ending, we are going to be starting a new tournament, and I'll do an official announcement and stuff. But God, I don't even remember how long ago this tournament started when I did signups and we did the first round. We had to wait for that round to play out. Yeah, so for all the videos to come up, it was probably a year ago. I have no idea when it actually started. Probably a year ago. But yeah, let's do a second one. So we've had some lesson learned. I'll talk about that in the announcement video for the tournament, but it'll be coming up in the next few days. So go ahead and sign up if you want to. I feel like there's definitely some lessons learned from this one, which we'll be taking into the next one. But yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed the series. Huge thanks to all the players who played in it. Both for putting up with my inept casting as I pretend I know what I'm talking about when I really got eliminated in round one. And for sending me messages, like especially Vanarus, man. Like, especially when you're losing, it's hard enough to do your turn, but to do your turn and to send those detailed messages, it's awesome. Special thanks to Sakane. If you haven't checked out, he's got most of this game put up in his perspective on his channel. You can ask in the comments, and I'll probably put a link for it in the description or something. But yeah, definitely go check that out. And then special thanks for him, not only doing that, but he's also been commenting in a lot of the videos. And of course been sending the detailed messages in game. So just a ton of kind of cool stuff from Sakane. So really interested to get his perspective on all this. And if you watch his videos, you get all his thinking on the detailed scripting for the battles and stuff too. So definitely go check that out. And then special thanks to all the players for playing. I think everybody did some pretty cool stuff. And of course, congratulations to Yis. You snowballed and whooped everybody's ass. And I think when the tournament started, I was pretty sure he was going to win. I've played, I can't remember if it's 2 or 3 games with him. I don't think I've won a game that this player's been in, the Yis player. Yeah, he hasn't won all the games, but I haven't won any of the games, I don't think. Maybe I won one. I don't think I have. I have to go back and check. I've been in a lot of games, but I was pretty sure this guy plays on like a different level, I think, than most players. And a lot of players don't necessarily know him. He kind of like flies under the radar. And he's pretty good at diplomacy. So I think he did a pretty good job this game, having everybody pretty concerned about Vanarus. When I'm pretty sure we know who the wolf in sheep's clothing was. But yeah, mad props to him. I think he styled on everybody, is how it basically went out. Yeah. So anyway, the final tournament winner is Arco, who was the player for Yis. And thank you for everyone watching. Thank you for all the players for playing. And everybody, in a sense, everybody in this game, they're also all a winner because they all won round one. And thanks to everyone. See you next time.